Good afternoon. My name is Tim Chapin. I have the great pleasure to be the Dean of the College of Social Sciences and Public Policy at Florida State University. Welcome to our last Policy Pub of the spring 2021 semester. This Policy Pub was created a handful of years ago by Associate Dean Dina Rollinger, who envisioned a forum by which we could bring our ideas and the work of our faculty into the community to showcase the breadth of what we do as a college in our research, in our teaching, and in our community engagement. We've been doing this a number of years now. We usually do 3 each fall and spring semester. As you can see joining us tonight, this year's approach has been a policy pubinar series in which we're doing online Zooms. We've had this little thing called COVID affect our lives for the better part of the last year. And we are trying to respond to that by still doing our engagement, but by doing online events like this. The way this works is your featured speaker tonight, which happens to be me, is going to be giving a talk about the future of higher education post-COVID. At the end of my talk, it'll be about 20-30 minutes tops. There'll be time for Q&A and engagement with the community. The way this works is you can type in questions using the Q&A or chat feature. It will also allow people, I think, because we've got a nice modest sized crowd, to engage by unmuting if that's possible. I can't remember our technology here. Dr. Rollinger, Associate Dean Rollinger, will moderate the Q&A. And I'll do my best to try to answer questions that you may have about the future of higher education in the world of COVID, or actually the post-COVID world. Again, I do a long introduction of myself, but I'll just say simply, it's a real honor to be able to test drive some of these ideas. As a dean of a college, actually the 3rd largest college at FSU, I think a lot about our post-COVID times. What is the university? What is the college going to look like? How will our operations differ? How will our teaching differ? So tonight I'm going to be putting out some thoughts that I've got about the future of the university in a post-COVID world. I should say 1 or 2 things before I get into the slideshow. First of all, I need to make it clear these are my ideas and not the ideas of the university. So I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone other than Tim Chapin, who happens to be a faculty member at the university. So I need you to hear the ideas that are expressed tonight are not vetted by, approved by, or the official position of Florida State University. They're my ideas, and I welcome your responses to them. The other thing I'm going to say is I'm not going to talk about the full breadth of the spectrum of the impacts of COVID on universities, but I welcome questions about whatever you've got on your mind or comments about whatever you've got on your mind about the future of higher education. So what I'm going to do now is start up my screen share and present to you a slide deck with some of these ideas. So again, welcome to the future of higher education in a post-pandemic world chat with me, Tim Chapin. So let me sort of set the stage. A year ago tomorrow was the day that FSU announced that we're going to be delivering classes remotely for the remainder of the spring semester. About a year ago, as we all know, the world began to change, and to my mind, to change in a forever kind of way. COVID-19 has brought tremendous impacts to our world, to our lives. Please know that as I talk about COVID tonight, I do not want to lose sight of the fact that we've had massive loss of life, not just in this country, but around the globe. And I don't want to minimize that. It's important that we hold up and remember those lost due to COVID. We've also had tremendous impacts upon our physical and mental health around this country, around the state, around the world as well. I think we're going to be wrestling with the health and mental impacts of COVID for years to come. COVID has brought economic real carnage, if you will, to much of the world, shuttered businesses, created budget crises, and caused other major economic and health challenges. Tonight is not about those things, but I want to make sure we acknowledge them. As we look across the types of things that we in the college are most interested in, COVID has impacted things like mortality rates, birth rates, housing choices, personal incomes, and all sorts of other things. We're spending money differently. We're choosing to travel differently. And I think that will be with us for a while. What does this mean beyond, what does this mean for places like FSU and higher education more generally? Well, to my mind, as I look at things, I believe we're going to talk about higher education in a pre-COVID and a post-COVID way. I believe that COVID-19 has brought changes to society and changes to higher education that will be felt for many, 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 many years to come, decades and decades to come. I believe that higher education will be very different than where we were. That will be a very different place in fall of 2021 than it was in fall of 19. And those changes, again, will continue moving forward. Let me, though, first say a few words about where we are at FSU now. I know we got a lot of people on the line that work at or study at the university and just like to be reminded about what's happening. In spring 2021, we're sort of getting closer to back to normal, although we still have most faculty and staff not working from campus. On-campus staffing levels are modest. And in fact, all of our buildings are still on lockdown. You need a swipe card to get in them right now. So we're not really open for normal business. It's a real joy to see that we're going to be holding in-person commencement graduation ceremonies in April. And we're going to be celebrating last year's graduates in some ceremonies in May as well. So it's going to be a real joy to see those graduates walk across the stage. We'll be masked, we'll be safe, but we're trying to celebrate people and get back to those wonderful ceremonies and those routines that things like commencement bring. Summer 2021, we're going to be ramping up and getting back closer to normal. And by fall of 2021, we're going to be expected to look a lot like we did before. So we're going to be a residential university. We anticipate Tallahassee will be buzzing with activity, not just at FSU, but at our dear friends FAMU and TCC's campuses. And we expect the world to be a lot more back to where we want to be by the time that August rolls around for FSU and everybody else. So that's where we are. Now let me get to the main theme of today, and that is to talk about what I see as the future of higher education. Again, my view is that higher ed will be remarkably different moving forward, in part and in large part because of COVID. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about a few key themes, a few key areas. I'm going to talk about COVID's impacts upon our workforce and the workplace. I'm going to say give you some ideas about how I think it's going to impact our instruction and learning approaches within higher education. I'm going to talk a little bit about changes to the future, to the student experience that I see coming as I look at the future of universities. And I also want to say a few words about the future campus, how I think the university campus setting may change as a result of the impacts of COVID. I could probably spend a lot of time talking about other things, but I'm not going to really touch on these too much tonight. Alumni engagement and fundraising is forever changed because of COVID and our experience with Zoom and other means of connecting with our dear alumni and friends through digital means. I'm not going to talk about impacts a lot tonight in my prepared remarks on research or, to my mind, some emerging new majors and curricular opportunities that I think COVID may bring to the university. So I'm going to talk about a few key areas, but not the breadth of higher education. The other thing I want to say is that I'm going to be talking about higher education as a whole, not so much FSU specifically, although I think a lot of these trends will impact Florida State University, they'll impact FAMU, they'll impact TCC, but this is my view of the impacts upon higher ed as a general industry or business. And I know we don't like to use those terms, but higher education is an industry made up of lots of organizations, lots of players, and it should be thought of to some degree in that way. Okay, so that's setting the ground for what I'm going to talk about. Let me now get into a little bit of specifics on a few of these things. Changes to the workplace and workforce. I think big changes are coming to the way FSU does its business, the way any university does its business. And the best way that I can describe these is that COVID is going to propel big changes in our work norms, in our cultures, and in our required skill sets to be successful. And I want to say a few words about each of those areas. So COVID over the last year for the university at FSU and most universities has seen people do remote work. They're in an office like I am in my residence right now, a converted bedroom that is now an office. They're working remotely, they're answering calls, they're doing video calls, email, text, all the other business of the university, but they're doing it from not at the university for the most part. That's how most of us have been doing business. This is true not just in higher ed, it's true across a lot of industries. They've seen a depopulation of their work centers, and people are working more remotely. What does this mean for the future of the university? Well, like many organizations, I believe that most universities are going to move to much different norms and cultures around remote work and flexible work hours. I can tell you that the reality at many universities is that faculty already enjoy many of these benefits. Many universities like FSU allow their faculty to work from wherever they choose to work. Many choose to work from an office at the main campus of FSU, but many choose not to come into campus very often, and they work from remote locations. But where we're headed with all universities, in my mind, is much more specific guidance and direction, particularly for staff members, non-faculty employees at the university. And I believe we're going to be moving towards a world in which there is going to be more remote work, more flexible work hours and work settings for many, many, many employees at the university. Now, it needs to be, I need to state the obvious and say that there are some employees that need to do their work from campus. If you're a landscape, one of our landscape personnel, you work on campus, making sure the grounds are as beautiful as they always are, you need to be on campus to do that work. If you work at the library and you work at the desk at the library and help people get access to materials, a lot of your work, if not all of it, you need to be at the library. But for a lot of our staff and for all of our faculty, they can work from remote locations, they can work non-traditional hours. And I think the last year has opened the university's eyes and higher education's eyes to the power of remote work and actually the benefits of remote work. Remote work provides for better working conditions and oftentimes happier employees. I hear from many of the staff in my college, wonderful staff, and they tell me how productive they are at home, how they're able to balance work and life better. They're able to take care of younger children if they've got that, or an older parent that may be living with them. And we have happier employees in many cases as a result. So remote work is actually, COVID has opened our eyes to the power of allowing people to work and be productive and do their jobs, not just while sitting at a desk in a building on campus, right? So we are going to, I think, see a loosening of some of those standards. On the institutional side, though, this is also going to lead to what I'm calling new management practices to measure work output and performance and to make sure people are working. It's very easy to see if somebody has come to work. When they come to campus, you can see them behind their desk, in their office, you can find them at their phone number, and so on and so forth. As we move to these more flexible work conditions, universities are going to have to update and rethink some of their HR guidance regarding how we measure work output, how we measure performance, and how we even measure things like attendance at work. So we need to understand that the workplace is going to allow more flexibility, but it's also going to bring a bit more, I would argue, some control and oversight, or at least via new means as a result. I also am seeing a real trend, and I think all of us working at the university and a lot of institutions are seeing this, collaboration and project management skill or tools like Canvas, Microsoft Teams, Wire, and a whole host of other ones out there are going to become increasingly used and I think become the standard approach to managing our files, to sharing information, to organizing our work lives. I think that our staff and faculty are going to have to retool a bit. And I know I do myself in to learn to use these tools as they're designed and to use them efficiently and well. I think for many of the people working in the academic affairs side of FSU, which is what the college is, we're about education, we're about research. These are going to be tools that you must know how to use and use well moving forward. One of the downsides of these changes is that social ties and office cultures, I think, are going to be harder to forge and harder to maintain. When you don't see people, I know I've experienced this and I hear this from everybody else, you're not sure what's going on in their life. You don't feel the same level of care and connection for them. FSU, one of my joys of being here 22 years now, is that it's very much a student success culture. People tend to be around, they tend to be available, they tend to be helpful. They can still be around, available, and helpful, but they're going to be more so remotely, I think, moving forward. I do not mean to say that we're going to be depopulating campus. I don't mean to say that everybody's going to work all the time from home, but if people are working more at home than they were before, that will bring some social costs to our offices, to our norms, and we're going to need to figure out what that means for the way we do work, for the formal jobs we do, but also the informal work that's required to make a workplace a success. There's also going to be, and I worry about this, flexible work arrangements and reduced social engagement yield much more business-like interactions and much more business-like office dynamics. I would argue that COVID might very well sort of propel universities to be a bit more mission-focused and a bit more efficient in the work they do, but at the possible cost of people being friendly, available to help, available to pitch in. It's remarkable in my world how now that I'm mainly doing emails and Zooms, people are a little less engaged. It's harder to read social cues. It's harder to stay in touch with people in a way beyond just the work using these new tools. So I think we need to understand there's happier employees, but there's also the possible cost of changing the social ties between employees. Instruction and learning. So let me talk now about the teaching side of the house of the university. What I think here is that COVID is actually speeding up some forces that have largely been reshaping reshaping teaching and learning for years now. I think COVID is a shock to the system that didn't so much propel us in brand new directions, but it sped up some of the process we've been going through as universities. Higher education for years has been wrestling with and engaging more and more in online and remote instruction. And I think that we're going to get more and more invested in that space at all universities moving forward. The last year has taught us that not every class can be taught well and efficiently and spectacularly online, but many of them can. And in fact, many people may be better teachers in a remote setting than they are in an in-classroom setting. So we've learned some really good skills over the last year, and I think COVID has forced faculty and students new skills, and these new skills are not at the margins of higher education anymore. They're going to be central to higher education moving forward in my college, at FSU, and I think every other university out there. Again, that's my opinion, but I think online remote instruction is not a one-year sort of big ramp up and we ramp back down. It's here and it's here to stay, and we need to get used to that idea. Something else we've heard a lot from both faculty and staff, asynchronous learning. A course in which you can, as a student, get into the class at any time, do work at any time, and disengage at any time. You're not sitting in a class either at a home computer on a video screen or in a classroom. Asynchronous learning, where it's sort of out of time, is very much in demand from both faculty and students. I'm thinking we're going to see a rethinking a little bit around our typical model of most of our classes being synchronous, be they in person or online. I think there's a growing, there's going to be a growing demand for asynchronous classes from not just both our traditional students, but increasing numbers of post-baccalaureate students coming back to school, looking to get that graduate degree, looking to get a certificate. So I think we need to wrestle with, what does this mean when we're not doing real-time engaged learning? What does that mean for the way we design our courses, the way we teach our courses, the way we learn? The demand is there and it's very, very strong. Flexible course design. This is something that I'm really interested in, and I'm not smart enough to have figured it out yet, but I think flexible course design and delivery are the future for a lot of the way we're going to be doing our courses. FSU as an institution has traditionally been relatively, I'm going to use the word conservative, and I don't mean that in a political sense, I mean that in a not very fast moving sense or risk-taking sense, in that we tend to teach our classes over 16 weeks. 2 or 3 times a week for each class in very set blocks of time. I think the future of instruction and learning is going to be around new modalities and new approaches to classes, hybrid courses, which we do a mix of in-person and online, synchronous and asynchronous, course intensives in which we maybe have the class meet for 4 days straight for 8 hours a day, as opposed to over the course of a semester. So we get a very tightly bound and time-bound course offering. Multi-college and multi-university partnership courses, I think, are part of our future, and other innovative models that, as I say, I'm not smart enough to understand or know much about, I think are going to flourish for those universities that allow them to. And my own view is that universities should allow them to. These new models are going to need to be supported through their incubation period. We're going to make mistakes. Some of them aren't going to start off real well, but I think we need to try and experiment with some of our course delivery approaches and learn from them. And I think we'll take instruction and learning in new directions as a result. There's really real excitement around a lot of these changes, but there are also some major challenges related to access. Not everyone has great internet. Not everyone can afford the technology required. Not everybody has the ability to sign on in the ways that we traditionally bring our online education into the world. I know that I've seen a lot of changes in our behavior of students. I think we've all experienced, it's remarkable how when you're on a Zoom or when you're in email exchange or if you're on social media, if you're not in the room with somebody, it emboldens you to maybe say things and act in ways that you maybe otherwise wouldn't act. And I think universities are going to wrestle with that. There are questions around affordability of all of this. Can the university afford these new course models and the technology required? What are the costs for students in terms of their own technology, their own remote work or remote course setup? And then I think we're also really struggling with issues of course assessment. How do you observe a Zoom class versus an in-person class and get a good sense of it? How do we go about determining what's working and what's not when it comes to these new models of course design and instruction? From my view, as a result of these challenges, I think universities need to invest in the skill sets of their faculty and staff. I think they need to think hard and work closely with their students to prepare them to assess their needs and capabilities, and also to ensure a continued good behavior and quality commitment to the learning experience in these new course designs. So I think there's a lot of upside, but there's some real challenges that we can't overlook when it comes to instruction and learning. The student experience. This is one I've thought some about, and I'm still wrestling in my own head about this, and I'd welcome your feedback for those of you attending tonight. I see a coming boom in the telemedicine world. I think COVID has completely changed the way a lot of us will be going and seeking health support and health guidance, and to go and meet with our doctors. There's been a big boom in, if I'm not feeling well and I don't want to go over to the doctor's office because I don't want to get COVID, I can now get online and do a remote appointment via Zoom, and they can assess that I've got an infection and dial up a Z-Pack or something else to help me get over whatever it is that I've got. Just as I think we're going to see a boom in telemedicine, I think we're going to see a boom in what I call teleeducation. And I don't mean to claim that that's my term, but I think that's partly where we're headed in higher education. I think teleeducation is going to become much more standard to the operations of universities, and that will have impacts upon the student experience. I can imagine a future in which students are largely advised via remote appointments rather than going and standing for many hours at a time outside of an office waiting to see an advisor. I can see a time in which university business is being done via online portals. So instead of dealing with people across a desk, you do most of your business online. Much of this has happened, but I think we're going to move even further along those lines. I also think that students are going to be offered options more and more to attend not just classes, but performances and university events from afar. There's a future, and I don't necessarily like this future, but you can imagine a future in which large numbers of students never step on campus, yet get a degree from a place like Florida State University. And I don't mean Tallahassee, I mean any FSU campus. I think that's a model that will become much more common than it has been before. And I think COVID has propelled us forward in that regard. I think that I know I'm Zoom fatigued. We're on a webinar now. I'm sure you're all sick of hearing talking heads like me do things like this, but I think that's a norm moving forward. I think that the great joy is that through teleeducation, through Zoom, through some of the other platforms we've got, we're able to connect with alumni, speakers, and industry leaders at rates and in ways we've never been able to do. I have connected with dear friends and new friends of the college that without Zoom and frankly without COVID, I ever would have been able to connect with, and there's a real upside to that. On the downside though, is there's nothing like having a speaker in a room engaging directly with students and those students seeing them in action, the way they dress, the way they speak, the way they interact, the way they ruminate over tough questions, the way that they wrestle with doing a presentation. So I worry about if we move to a lot of webinars that we lose the ability to develop the social skills and the professional development skills of our students. I also think that there's a real joy to in-person connecting that Zoom and the phone and emails can never, ever, ever replace. So on the upside, we're going to be able to connect in new ways and with people we'd never connect with. On the downside, if we're not careful, we can lose some of the social connections and networking that those engagements with alumni might very well bring to our students and to our faculty. I do think that it's not going to be just in the classroom and just for events, but it's going to revolve around all sorts of things. I think flexible work and technology is going to really change all of the university, the way students do projects, the way they complete internship requirements, the way they even engage in community activities or do professional development. This isn't just a classroom thing. This isn't just a talking heads thing. This is a new model in which we can engage students in the world in very positive ways, but if not managed well, maybe not so positive ways. So the student experience is likely to become even more technology focused than it was before. As I walk on campus, I'm always amused when I see groups of students walking along and they're not talking to each other. They've all got their heads in their phones, doing whatever it is that they do on their phones. And I've been known to do that myself now and then. You lose the world because you're so wrapped up in the technology. I think as a result of COVID, we're pushed even a little bit further down that direction, and we need to be very careful to support and protect what I call the social, active, engaged student experience. I think that our student organizations, our faculty, our staff are going to be key to supporting the social, and we need to make sure that we don't let the technology become the driver for everything. I think we need to be careful to ensure that the student experience is an engaged one, is a human-centered one, and not just a technology-centered one. And that actually opens up to my last point, and I am bringing this into a landing here relatively soon so we can get into our conversation, and that is to talk about the future campus. This is one that I'm really still wrestling with my own ideas here, but I see that university campuses are going to need to adapt to new demands while also promoting the social connection, spontaneity, joy, and engagement that makes them such special places to work, to study, to really sort of explore life when you're in a school for whatever period of time you're at a university like FSU. Among the new demands, well, actually, before I get to that, there's a view that places like FSU and FAMU and TCC have this, what we call 24/7 wraparound experience of in-residence universities. Students live there or at least near there. There's a tremendous demand for the in-person engaged learning experience. But I worry that the changes in employee work arrangements, our new instructional models, and the move to teleeducation is going to lead to fewer in-person interactions. And that's a real challenge moving forward. Think about how engaged you can be in a place or in an organization if all of your interactions were just via Zoom like this. You're much less connected to the people, you're much less connected to the place. So we need to be careful to protect those experiences while we go down this path of the post-COVID teleeducation world. I think campus space utilization is going to undergo some changes. The way we manage our facilities and the way we think even about things like transportation and parking is going to require a rethink. I think that, excuse me, we're going to have to see a lot of our classrooms and a lot of our social spaces be retooled for remote engagements and remote or online event viewing. We might need to think about how we redesign our classrooms to allow for a hybrid classroom experience where we have in-person students as well as students maybe studying from afar. There's a real design that we can do that well or we can do that poorly, and there's going to be some investment there. I'm really interested, and I haven't thought much about this, but if we have a lot of faculty and staff that are choosing to work primarily not from campus, do they all need offices? Do we need to rethink the way we allocate office space? And do we need to think about things like hoteling arrangements? And by that we mean where several people share an office and they're scheduled in there at different times during the week. And it's no single person's office, it's multiple people's offices, or office, I should say. So there's a real interesting question about, well, what does the future university office need look like? And this is going to be an ongoing challenge for, frankly, all businesses that are looking at their space and the way they use it. And if I'm in campus parking and transportation, there's this real question: if more and more people can do their work from afar, do we need as many parking spaces? Do we need as many buses getting around campus to transport people around? What does that mean for the fees that the university collects for parking and for other things? I think that there might be real benefits to campuses and that they can become even more centered on the needs of people on 2 feet, or if they're handicapped and they require assistance on 2 wheels, so to speak, or on wheels, instead of the cars that we oftentimes associate with FSU's campus. So rethinking our parking and transportation services will be a real challenge, not just for FSU, but I think all universities as we move into this teleeducation world. And then the other thing that I'm seeing, and this is part of the retooling of campus, is I think we're moving towards a model of flexible educational and event spaces. Flex spaces are needed across campus that promote co-working and collaborative work. They promote those connections across disciplines, across colleges, across idea sets, and they're going to require really great technology in those spaces. This is an expensive retooling for universities to do well. FSU has created a few of these on our campus. So we've got a wonderful innovation hub that was created a few years ago, really remarkable space, very well utilized. And there are really great spaces in FSU's libraries that look a lot like this, but these are not cheap investments. They're very expensive, and figuring out where they go and how they'll be used will be a big part of the retooling of the future campus. So as I bring my sort of remarks to a close, I'm just going to end with a few ideas and then we'll get into the Q&A. It's important to understand that we've had a massive shock to the system with COVID, and in my view, the world of higher ed is different in a post-COVID-19 world than it was before. I think we're forever changed as an industry, in my view, when it comes to higher education. Having said that, universities have been evolving from the very first day that they were created. Higher education has always been evolving, sometimes quickly and sometimes slowly. What's happened in this case is COVID has brought new challenges and propelled us forward in new directions. That's true, but it's also sped us up on some things that we maybe were working towards. As I say, teleeducation, I think, has been coming for a while, but COVID really pushed us forward much more quickly than, frankly, any of us might have been ready for, but it has pushed us forward. As I gaze into the crystal ball for higher ed, what do I see? Well, I look at the defining features of the future of higher education as work flexibility. I think there's going to be curricular and instructional innovation. I think there needs to be real attention to maintaining the social role of universities in connecting people, getting them out of their comfort zones, getting them exposed to new ideas, and reinforcing old ideas in their own minds. I think there's going to need to be tremendously strategic investment in people to retool the people that are doing the work of the university, but also in the places to prepare us for a world in which teleeducation is a major part of the way we do business. And then more generally, I think there's just going to be a real need to embrace new ways of doing the business that universities have always done. We're still going to be doing education. We're still going to be educating students on the way to them earning degrees that will do them good in their careers and do good in the world that they're going to work and operate and live in. We're going to still be doing remarkable research and generating new ideas and patentable products and new policy ideas for use by the legislature and the national government or the world as a whole. A lot of our the mission hasn't so much changed, but how we're going to do the mission is changing, and I think it's going to be forever different in a post-COVID world. So with that, let me stop sharing, ask Dr. Rollinger if she wants to join us and help us navigate our Q&A.
All right, thank you so much, Dean Chapin. Really appreciate your talk. Just a reminder, on the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. You can put a question or comment in that location. You can also raise your hand and I'll be able to call on you that way. So Cindy has a question. She asks, how will universities afford to maintain their physical plants and location? Some auxiliary funds cover other areas that lose money.
The financing question is one that I sort of actively avoided. So how is it that we're going to pay for all this in the midst of sort of declining or challenged revenues? The way university finance works is we have a lot of what are called auxiliary operations within the university. So housing, parking and transportation, and the dining services on campus are all essentially independent funds with independent contracts. If there's less demand for those things, and there's less revenues for those things, and how we maintain our dining facilities and housing could be challenged. I don't have a real good answer to that. I know that universities like FSU that are public, we get roughly 40% of our money as a university from state appropriations and tuition, but much of the rest of it is through fees and through charges for services, essentially. In the broader area of sort of public policy and government activity in universities, there's been a big move over time to service charges. We charge people for services. I imagine that's one of the ways that we'll try to cover that. Technology fees is a good example of what universities charge to help cover the costs of some of those investments. But it's a real challenge. Maintenance costs are large and increasing.
So Carl asks, in the push to maintain and expand the student experience, do you see an increasing role for athletics? And how do you see the university making trade-offs between academics and athletics?
Oh boy, Carl, that's a massive question. How do universities balance? Athletics are seen at a university like FSU and many big public institutions as sort of core to the social life of universities. I don't see that going away anytime soon. How to balance academics and athletics is an ongoing challenge for every big time sports oriented university out there, of which I would put FSU in there. So I don't have a good answer as to how to balance that. It is part of the core experience of students at FSU and lots of other universities out there. So athletics, as well as the arts, are key to that. Paying for that is oftentimes expected to be an auxiliary operation that the academic side is not expected or shouldn't subsidize athletics, but sometimes it happens at some universities. That's certainly the case at a lot of universities where the arts are subsidized, that there are carrying costs for the universities, but that's part of the student experience. So that's an ongoing challenge, and not just at FSU, but every other university. I don't know that that's going to go away anytime soon. And I do think that we'll be wrestling with that for as long as universities exist, at least here in the United States.
Yeah, so I actually have a question about whether or not our average FSU student might change. So one of the things that occurs to me is I'm super excited when I think about teaching technology and using technology, since this is the future, but I also get really concerned about the digital divide and knowing that we have high schools around the country where students don't get the kinds of skills that they need to succeed in this environment. So what does this do to universities like FSU? Does our average kind of demographic student change and the kinds of skills they have to come in with?
The demographic piece is an interesting one. I do think that I do think COVID has promoted greater stratification and certainly not reduced it. If you look at the health impacts, the economic impacts, The top 20%, frankly, if you look at the stock market and the real estate market, are probably better off at the end of COVID. I don't mean that individually, I mean as a whole in terms of their wealth and in terms of their holdings. Whereas those at the lower end have suffered greatly, lost their jobs at higher rates, tend to be sicker and have larger health challenges, in part because of the embedded sort of lives that they live and the lack of medical care. So for higher education, getting back to your question, I do think there's a real concern it's going to actually augment already existing problems around stratification, that people from lower means don't have access to the technology. They don't know how to operate in an online environment. If they do get into universities, they show up and sometimes they're not even quite sure how to go about doing business. And I think that one of my worries, I guess, Dina, I'm going to sort of take a riff off your question and say that if we have less people around in person to help guide students when they need that extra bit of help, that's one of the real concerns I have. It's not just for our office environment, but we've got a lot of students that just need somebody, and I've heard this story many times from our graduates, where there was somebody that helped me in that moment of crisis. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made it. And I worry that if we're going to move to new business practices, we're not going to have those experiences for people. So I sort of went a long way there to say, I don't think COVID helps the stratification problem. It makes it worse.
And just a reminder that you can also raise your hand. There's a little hand symbol on the bottom. Alan asks, what is the disproportionate impact upon public versus private universities?
There's real interest. I've been reading as widely as I can about the impact across higher ed more generally. Private institutions have the benefit of their own cost controls. And by that, I mean they can afford to charge what they need to charge to survive. What you see for private institutions is ones that are very highly regarded and high in demand are actually doing just fine in terms of their finances through COVID. I mean, relatively speaking, everybody's budgets are hurting, but smaller, more niche and less in demand privates are in real trouble. And in fact, there's an expectation that there's going to be a growing trend of a number of smaller private institutions that fail because there's just not, or that they go under because there's not enough demand for students to pay the bills, literally. The advantage for public institutions is that, as an example, public institutions like FSU have received funding as part of the 3 rounds of federal COVID funds, including the most recent one signed by President Biden. Public institutions are being supported by these funds, helping to backstop some of our funding shortfalls. There's also for public universities like FAMU, like FSU, like the University of Florida, we are backed by the state of Florida, and they are able to help support us as needed. There's sort of a back, there's the full faith and credit of the public sector behind public institutions. So there are real differences for publics versus privates. Real quick on this, and we'll go to the next question, is FSU a year ago was very worried about not having enough students, not seeing a big drop off in our applications, seeing our student quality decline because we had fewer students that want to be here. And in fact, this year we're having a record number of applications. I want to say it's something like 65,000. Where FSU and other in-demand big publics have actually seen very little drop-off in our numbers of applications and are not expecting to have any trouble getting students to come back to campus. But for smaller and more regional institutions, they're really struggling. So there's a size effect as well, besides just public and private.
Yeah, just a follow-up on I know you didn't really want to talk about the funding bit, but I also wonder, based on what you said, does that mean that public institutions that are in demand have an advantage in terms of innovating in ways where you were talking about collaborative spaces where they can work with different kinds of corporations, for example, to create these collaborative spaces that would, benefit students in multiple ways?
Absolutely. There is a real hierarchy in higher education. Not all universities have the same resource base. Not all universities have the same sort of commitment from their alumni or the same number of alumni. Universities in sort of the top 20% of the higher education world are much better prepared, are able to adapt in powerful ways that many of the other smaller universities aren't able to. I guess we're blessed being at FSU is that I don't mean to say we are rolling in money, because I know our budget and I know we're not, but we are much better placed to adapt and respond to these new changes than a lot of other smaller universities in states that take a very different approach to state funding for the universities. I should mention that Florida was ranked, I think just yesterday, as the #1 state for its higher education system. The state of Florida has been, over the last decade in particular, very, very supportive of investing in state institutions. So we're well placed to innovate, but there are a lot of other states that's not the case, and a lot of other smaller universities that they just don't have the resource base to draw on.
Yes, Marion, who is a frequent attendee, has a question. She says that I've noticed that some FSU events that were open to the public, like the International Bazaar put on by the Center for Global Engagement, have gone virtual and are restricted to FSU students and their guests. Registration for the virtual meetings require an FSU ID number. Will public participation in FSU events continue to be restricted, or is the hope that with the public, those folks with no FSU connections will be included as they were in the in-person events as of the past?
That's Marion. We've seen Marion. We've seen you at many of these, and thank you for coming back and being such a regular at the Policy Pub. Marion, great question. This is something that I think many universities are struggling with. In the private university world, there are oftentimes real sort of general access issues to on-campus or virtual campus events. In that for private institutions, they're very much, you're either a member of the family or you're not a member of the family. So you'll see that, I think, trend accelerate for some of those types of institutions. That's what I expect. For public institutions, there's traditionally been, for a lot of our programming, this idea that we are, because we're funded by the state of Florida, open to community residents, to non-official university people joining in those events. Based on what I've seen at FSU, and I think a lot of publics will remain committed to that. Some of what we've, I think, been struggling with is sometimes the technology gets in the way of allowing as much public participation as we'd like. In that the certain, as you mentioned, people that don't have FSU IDs can't get in. Sometimes there are limited access events only to university people. But I think that's something we'll be wrestling with. I can tell you my sense is public institutions like FSU will remain committed to public programming for a lot of our events. Doesn't mean every event's open to the public, but many of them will be. I would urge you, if there's something like the CGE event that has now been restricted, I'm going to take a note on this and reach out to our good friends at the Center for Global Engagement and sort of try to understand a bit better what's going on there. So help hold us accountable and let us know the types of things you'd like to be involved in, but also realize that sometimes events are restricted for whatever reason. But the great question. I do think we'll be wrestling with this in the higher education space for a while.
Forgot to unmute myself. So once again, you can raise your hand. The chat is open. I'll take this moment to do what I normally do, which is just remind you of all the different ways that you can connect with us. And so we have the blog that you can certainly come and visit, wicked-solutions.blog. We feature student work there, faculty teaching, and we have a great new series called Meet a Social Scientist, where you can get to know our faculty and what they're doing in the college. So I would encourage you to please check out our blog. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at the handle @FSUCOS, and on Instagram as well at FSUCOS. So I'm sorry, no at FSUCOS. And if you didn't, when you came in, if you didn't see Rob Nixon's note, we do have our YouTube station, and you'll be able to see this Policy Pub as well as other taped or recorded events for the college at our college YouTube channel. So I'll stop sharing and see if there's any other questions. It looks like we have one in the Q&A. So Marion was following up. She says, actually the CGE made an exception for me, but I hope that it will be more accessible in the future. Thank you.
And Marion, that's the type of feedback we need to hear. Sometimes, I'll be honest with you, as we're learning these new tools and tricks, we make mistakes. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'm glad they were able to help you out. Good.
Yes, so I'll give it just one more minute to see if anyone else wants to pop in and ask about the future of higher education. And of course, as always, thank you for spending your time with us and sharing your thoughts with us. We do appreciate it. This is our last policy pub of the semester. So be sure you keep a lookout. You'll start to see some advertising for our fall events, probably at the beginning of August or late July. So let's see, we have another one in the queue. Oh, nope, that was one I already got. So I'm not seeing any other questions. Dean Chapin, do you have any parting words of wisdom?
I just say, I think that what the future of higher education still needs to be about people. And that's the number one message as I look at the future, not just of our college, and as we talk as an institution about the next Florida State University, and it's an ever evolving institution, is we need to keep center in that it's about the people. It's not, the place matters, the technology is powerful, the brand is wonderful, but ultimately the people drive higher education. And I think this is a broader issue. I know Dr. Rollinger and I are both sociologists. We believe that people make the world go around, as do the institutions that people make up. So I think I'm excited about the future. We're going to need to take care to make sure that we enable these students of all ages, but particularly our younger students, to have the social skills beyond the social media skills that they seem to have so very well developed. And I think we're in a good spot to do that. So Dina, is there anything I've missed? I'm interested if you've got any thoughts about any of this that you might share.
No, I mean, I think that you're completely right. It's going to be a really interesting dance to try to figure out how do you find that line between utilizing technology in a way that's going to really help students or propel students and make our faculty even more productive than they already are, but creating that social experience so that they have those kinds of connections that makes higher education, makes places like FSU so special. And so Christy popped in and asked, so do we hope to be in person next year with the policy pub?
I can imagine we're going to do a little bit of both. I can imagine some policy pubs and some policy pubinars. Why? Because as I started, the webinar is here to stay, friends. We'd love to see you in person at an event or two next year, but we're also going to continue to do events like this virtually. Why? Because people demand it. It's easier for many of you. Our turnouts tend to be just outstanding. So we're going to do a little bit of both. That's my answer. What do you think, Dina?
Yeah, I think that you're right. We'll try to keep doing Wicked webinars a couple times a year and keep doing the policy pub and find out what balance works so that we can make sure that we're getting information to you and that we get your valuable feedback. We want to make sure that we can try to keep all the folks that are new to the policy pub this year. We want to keep you with us. So once again, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks Dean Chapin for your thoughts. And I wish you all a great rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you.